Welcome everyone, Costini here with my campaign overview guide for Tehenhauin, the Cult of Sotek, which came with the Prophet and the Warlock DLC, which is probably one of the more popular DLCs that Warhammer 2 had. Though not for this guy, he probably is not one of the more popular Legend Lords in the game. His campaign was never as good as Claw's campaign, because Claw has nukes, you have annoying sacrifices. But let's take a look at Tehenhauin and the Cult of Sotek. Now, this is based on things that did happen in the lore, where he found the plaques of Sotek. He thought about sacrificing an enormous amount of skaven, as Clan Pestilent was invading Lustria and killing a lot of the skinks in particular. And he found the plaques of Sotek and decided to bring Sotek back, or to bring Sotek into the world as a god. And that's kind of what his campaign is based on. Faction-wide effects, you get the plus 200% upkeep for Saurus units and Temple Guard until you complete Stage 1 of the Prophecy of Sotek. You get sacrificial offerings from winning battles that can be offered to Sotek to receive a variety of powerful rewards, and minus 75% right cost for the Rite of Sotek. The Rite of Sotek buffs your skinks, your chameleon skinks, your regular skinks, chameleon stalkers, and red-crested skinks, as well as giving you 20% missile strength for skink and pterodon units in the last 15 turns. It's a pretty solid right. Now, they've also put him in an interesting starting situation, because his initial enemy is just basically a skaven garrison. Not exactly the most fun experience, and I'm just going to lower the battle difficulty to what resolve this to win it, because it is a provincial capital, which is a bit of a shame. But anyway, you basically get these sacrificial offerings. You'll gain them through every battle, and you do have a post-battle option. Now, in terms of his Lord effects, you get minus 3 corruption, 10 leadership against Skaven, physical resistance for skink units in his army. Then you get various mount choices until you get the Ancient Stegodon, Engine of the Gods, which is always pretty nice to have. And then you get the choice between Promises of Reconstruction or Fanatic. Now, Fanatic gives you weapon strength, benefits when fighting against Skaven or Disorder or factions, armor for skink units, which is pretty damn solid, and leadership and melee attack for skink units. Promises of Reconstruction gives you 2 control in all provinces and 30% income in the local province. I'm not sure if Tehenhauin is a great fighter or worth using, but if you could put him in a province with a gold mine to generate 30% more income, that might be worth it. Then you also get an upkeep benefit for skinks, casualty replenishment, as well as more sacrificial offerings, global recruitment, and local recruitment in the local province. There's pros and cons with both approaches, though I personally would probably go with Promises of Reconstruction more. You also get plus free control from the Plaque of Sotek, which also gives you a leadership and damage resistance. He doesn't have an item set, he just has the one item. So you can't recruit Saurus until you deal with the first stage. Now, getting the first stage done requires you to get to own the entirety of 2 provinces, which will give you 200 sacrificial offerings and 5 pounds in treasury, and then you'll also need to do 5 rituals, and that will unlock tier 2. Now, the sacrifices of Sotek do things like this. They can give you global recruitment duration, unlocks a random follower, a random banner, armor for all units, leadership for skink units, jungle swarm for all armies as an ability. It can be very, very beneficial in a campaign to have this. Though it does mean you do have a bit of a slower start, but it's not necessarily too big of an issue. So basically early on you can have these kind of rituals, and then you will unlock more and more. You will unlock more and more things, more and more rituals in your campaign as you get more sacrifice. You can get growth, you can get untainted, you can get blessed units through these rituals. It is nice to be able to unlock blessed units on demand. Now, Oxyatl is still much better in this respect, don't get me wrong, but it is a fairly solid campaign mechanic all the same. you do start with the ability of getting a Skink Chief on turn 1, which means you will get replenishment, courtesy of the Skink Chief. And you'll also have the Chameleon Stalkers and Chameleon Skinks, though you do need to really play this campaign. I would say you do need to have Oxyatl's DLC to really make it work in the best possible way. I mean, you could play it without that DLC, but it's probably best to have that DLC. In which case, you have to ask the question, why wouldn't you play Oxyatl? He's a better Legendary Lord, he has more climate types, he's far more powerful, and you don't have to deal with sacrifices. Though granted, the sacrifices themselves will give you quite a bit of power. Now, here's the thing to mention about this campaign. You start basically right on Skrolk's doorstep. So you take this element and you can just march north directly to deal with Skrolk after he takes the Sentinel of Time. Like, you can just recruit a bunch of units over here, and then once Skrolk takes the Sentinel of Time, pick a battle with him, use the sacrifices over here to make it work. And it can work pretty well. Skrolk does have Plague Laws and he does have a powerful army, but if you can eliminate him early on, then you're eliminating a major thorn in your backside. So you might want to head north directly over here to take his capital, and then take his settlement over here. And that should be enough to deal with the two rights. Or you could ignore Skrolk, do so at your peril, ignore Skrolk and instead take the Copper Desert. Keep in mind, you do have good relations with the Southern Sentinels, and you do have good relations with the Elves over here, though you may want to have this territory, to take this territory yourself. I'd say eliminating either the Sentinels or more likely the High Elves is probably in your interest, just because you can then sell the territory to another faction. So say for instance you take out the High Elves over here in the Capes, and then you sell the territory to the Southern Sentinels. That should push you towards the path of Confederation. And then you march over here and you're going to encounter a Karf. You might also end up at war with the Dwarves. You don't want to take the Dwarven territory, though you could sell it to Gorok, because he is certainly going to get this particular settlement, and you can then sell the Spine of Sotek to him. Now, campaign victory conditions require you to deal with Clan Spittle, Pestilent, and Scrat, which you're going to deal with on turn 1, no problem. Then you basically need to take over control of the entirety of Lustria. Once you do this first prophecy tier, you are going to be able to recruit Saurus. So early on, you're going to rely on Skinks. Well, you can always recruit Saurus, that's not the problem, but you don't even have the building to recruit Saurus, and the upkeep 200% is a pretty rough situation to deal with. But it is pretty easy to deal with it, and Skinks can handle Skaven. It's not really too much of an issue in a campaign. So that's what I do. Like I deal with Skrolk, then deal with Clan Spittle, then march back south, work Gorok, deal with Zulufar, and go deal with these the elves here, sell the territory to the Southern Sentinels, and then march over here to deal with Karf. Hopefully, by this point, you should have quite a few Saurus in your arsenal. Bear in mind, this particular province of the Turtle Isles isn't necessarily great, but you do want to eliminate Rakarth, because of all the factions that might be an issue here, Rakarth is actually the biggest one. He's going to recruit quite a lot of units. If he gets Black Ark Corsairs, he's going to throw a lot of heavily armored units against you. And really, even Spearmen and Dark Shards can tear your army to shreds, let alone all the monsters he can get. And after that, you can deal with what remains of the Skaven. Keep in mind, the Skaven, I think they do start with at least one settlement here in the Volcanic Islands, or they're going to get it very, very quickly. So dealing with the Skaven early on in a campaign is what's going to occupy your time during that campaign. And then, once everything else is dealt with, Luther Harkon, Alberic, Hunts Marshal marching to the north, confederating factions along the way. Now, one of the things I've noticed in a lizardmen campaign is Mazdamundi tends to do worse than usual. Like, you might end up in a situation where Mazdamundi is the most powerful faction in all of Lustria, or you might end up in a situation where you're marching north to save his ass from Morathi and others. Now, you don't want to go too far north because Frozen is unpleasant climate, but you do want to get control Well, not necessarily of Mazdamundi, he's kind of worthless as a lord, but Hexoatl does have a gold mine and some pretty good landmarks that you can take advantage of. So you do want the Hexoatl province, the Isthmus of Lustria. And after that stage, well, you can cross the ocean. You probably will have to deal with Kairos at one point or another, because while Oxyatl and Kairos are going to battle it for a certain time, generally speaking, it is Kairos that ends up winning that particular engagement. The reason behind that situation is that Oxyatl, as you might imagine, recruits a lot of skinks. Skinks are not so great in auto-resolve. The reason they're not so great in auto-resolve is their armor isn't the best in the world, whereas Kairos will get a bunch of heavily armored units, specifically Forsaken or Chaos Warriors. So Oxyatl will just, AI Oxyatl will just end up losing those engagements in auto-resolve against AI Kairos, so you're going to have a real war on your hands. It is unpleasant to have to deal with the Chaos Waste, but it's not necessarily something you need to rush. It's going to take some time, like 30 plus turns or so. By that point, you should be controlled basically all of Lustria to one extent or another. And after you're done with that, you can obviously head over here in the Southlands, each tic-tac-toe how he should behave, because tic-tac-toe is just an annoying bastard in every single campaign. Take over this territory for yourself, or you can just land at Archon's doorstep, take over the Great Desert of Araby, take all of Archon's territory, and then take all of Khemri, because all of the climate that's here is suitable to you. So that would be your campaign plan. As an endgame crisis, I would say the best bet you have if you just want to win the campaign would be the Nagash one. Everything else would just be a really annoying thing to deal with, because yes, you can enable the Skaven one, but the problem is most of the Skaven factions are pretty far away from you. So, like, if you just want to use the endgame crisis to win the campaign earlier, I would certainly go with the Black Pyramid. And that's all there is to it. Questini here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.